Good evening. This week's Parshas and Gershon, it was wonderful to meet your son and your wife. This week's Parsha, Pekudei, is the final Parsha of Sefer Shemos, and indeed, in unison this Shabbos, as I always say to you, by Chazak, that we stand up and proclaim to the world and to each other and to ourselves that we should strengthen, rejuvenate, revitalize our spirit, our koiches, our strengths for the continuation into the next. It's not that we stop and we finish and we take a breather. We begin immediately by Mincha, the next Sefer Vayikra. And it indeed is a very auspicious time, each and every Chazak. Now, this Shabbos is also Shabbos Mevorachim HaChodesh, Chodesh Nisan, and Rosh Chodesh Nisan is always one day. It's never, ever 2 days. And we therefore, of course, take out 2 Sifrei Torah this Shabbos because Rosh Chodesh is Motzoi Shabbos and Sunday. It's not on Shabbos. That was Adar, the last one. And we take out 2 Sifrei Torah. One is the regular Seder, which it's only Parshas Pekudei. And the second Sefer Torah is Parshas HaChodesh. Now, we know that last week the Seder began with the word Vayakel, which means Moshe Rabbeinu gathered the multitudes, as Kol Adas B'nai Yisrael Vayomer Aleim. This Shabbos, Pekudei, is the individual, not the klal. That Eile Pekudei HaMishkan, the counting and the acknowledgement of each and every item and its individuality and its chashivos. And the Meforshim tell us that whereas getting together with the klal is of course in many instances important and should be done, but we want to underscore that the individual person has its rare and remarkable distinction, and it could be 10 million people. Excuse me. But by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the chashivas, 1 and 10 million to him is the same thing. For us, we think of 10 million. How could we ever conceptualize or imagine or have the vision of such a multitude? But HaKadosh Baruch Hu looks at each and every one. That is his koyach. He's able to. And the chashivas and the special uniqueness of each and every individual is underscored. Now, the parsha begins and says that Eile Pekudei HaMishkan, Mishkan HaEdus. And the question asked is, why does it say twice the word Mishkan? It could have just said Eile Pekudei HaMishkan HaEdus. Why did they have to say it twice? So some Meforshim, and the Medrash, of course, brings that it's a remez, a hint, an acknowledgement that there were 2 Batei Migdosh, 2 separate Bais HaMigdosh. In other words, in the plural is Batei HaMigdosh. The first one stood for 410 years, and the second one stood for 420 years. And we know that the reason it says it twice is because, say, the Meforshim and the Medrash, that it wanted to be Merames Mashkan. The word Mashkan means when you take something and you go and pawn it off, but you haven't lost your connection. Because anytime you want, at least in most pawn shops, that somebody takes an heirloom because he's so desperate for the money, and he goes to a pawn shop and they give him money against the candelabra or whatever the item is, but they have an understanding in most cases that if they come back within 90 days, 100 days, with the money, they can take back their possession, and that they didn't lose the heirloom or the very, very special uniqueness that's close and emotionally tied to the family or to the individual. Now, excuse me. We know that if somebody is very close to something, and they don't want to lose that connection, so that's what they'll do, and it's called a mashkon. Why is all of this mentioned in regard to our Sedra? Because the word mishkan, the tabernacle, the actual mishkan, and mashkan are spelled exactly the same way. So it wants to be merames to you that yes, HaKadosh Baruch Hu took away the two Batei Migdash. They were destroyed. But it was only, so to speak, because of a cheshbon that HaKadosh Baruch Hu had, and it became in a state of mashkan. Yes, we do not have it today, and b'karv b'yameinu bezras Hashem, we will have the third Beis HaMikdash come. But the inyanim of the closeness and everything that it represented, the Mishkan, was like only a mashkan, that we only temporarily departed because we needed the collateral for some cheshbon HaKadosh Baruch Hu had against us, or something hanging over us as a people. But that's why it says Mishkan twice, to be merames that yes, we lost the first Beis HaMikdash, and there were many things that once it was lost, we did not have in the second Bais HaMikdash. And yes, we lost the second Bais HaMikdash, and there certainly was a lessening, a dilution of the level and the intensity of the ruach and the closeness that we had to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that without the Bais HaMikdash, there was a major difference. But it was only b'toras mashkan, because we're going to get it back and get it back full strength, and that we won't need a mishkan anymore. And like Rabbeinu Bachaya, or some pronounce it Rabbeinu Bachya, he says that the Mishkan stood a total of 479 years. And the word ha'edus, because the Meforshim asked, what did you need the word ha'edus? We understand what the concept of the Mishkan was and everything, because ha'edus is begematria 479. The exact number of years that it serviced Klal Yisrael to be able to hold on, so to speak, in a more intensified way with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's why it mentions the word ha'edus, the gematria of 479. Now, the only time it says in one of the psukim, Vayikach Moshe, the word Vayikach, it only says by the Aron. Every other keli that was in the Bais Hamikdash, it did not have the uniqueness of having the word Vayikach. So why over here, by the Aron, does it suddenly say? It doesn't say it by anything else. So the answer, says the Ramban, is because when Moshe Rabbeinu got the luchos, the tablets, it was before there was a Mishkan. Let's not forget that the tablets were given to Moshe Rabbeinu before, by Matan Torah, much before the story of the Mishkan. HaKadosh Baruch Hu vayehi mimocharos, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu told them to build a Mishkan, and that was the day after Yom Kippur, so it was later, a few months later. So the tablets, the luchos, were put into a wooden box. Moshe Rabbeinu kept it in his ohel, in his tent. And says the Medrash, but once there was the Mishkan, Moshe Rabbeinu took, Betzalel actually took and made a golden box from outside and from inside and put the luchos in that. So that's the reason it says Vayikach Moshe, because it was a second placing. The first time was before the Mishkan, and it was only a box of wood. And then when the Mishkan was built, there were 2 extra boxes of gold, which Betzalel built, and Moshe Rabbeinu therefore took the luchos and put them in with the wooden box in between into the gold boxes. So to accentuate that there was like a second putting for the luchos, they were first put just in the wood, and now they were put into the gold. So therefore it's in the outside and the inside, and it says the word Vayikach. Now, we know that the Gemara says that when Rabbi Avuhu, who was an unbelievable Amora, that before he was nifter, he cried. So the Talmidim, the students, asked him, Rebbe, what are you crying about? You lived a life of tremendous tzidkas. He was an Amora. And there wasn't a minute he wasn't learning or davening or doing chesed or doing the mitzvahs. So what was he crying about? So, and the Medrash says, it says that when Rabbi Avu was nifter, he came up and he saw that there were castles and palaces and rooms which were adorned with such luxury, and they said to him, this is all yours from your life in Olam Hazeh. And he was shocked. And the Medrash even says on the pasuk, Vatischak liyom acharon, that we sing for the women, Shlomo HaMelech made Eish Yisrael for his mother. There's one opinion it was for his wife, but most hold it was for his mother. And we sing it every single week before Kiddush Friday night, because it's a testimony to the fact that there is a reference to Reb Avu. One of the pshatim that pasuk was said in reference even though Shlomo HaMelech was 1,500 years before Reb Avu, or maybe more, maybe 1,700. But it was a reference that he lived his whole life thinking, that's it, he's not going to be, and that's why he cried. But the question, the obvious question is, Reb Avu was so big, was he fooling himself? Chas v'sholom. But he held that he knew he learned and he davened his whole life, but he held it was never completed. That means sometimes we have a very lofty inspiration and we begin doing something, or we undertake to do something very good. And at the end of the story, we don't finish. And it even says that, and we're going to talk about it in a minute, that when a person undertakes to do something, it is not just the bottom line by Yidden. Every inch and every amount of L'Shem Shamayim, proper intention and work towards that goal is on a silver platter waiting for the person, whether or not he finished the job. And when people say, well, it's the bottom line that counts, not so. Because by Yidden, if he worked for 5 years to build a house for Aniyim and Almanos and all sorts of and at the end it collapsed. Oh, well, it was all for nothing because of the fact that no one ever came to live there or to be there. Not so. We know that we have a job in this world to do the best we can. And Rebbe Avuah was doing the best he could, but he held that it never came out as shiny with its full luster as it should present itself at the end. And therefore he thought it never counted. And that's why he was crying. He said, I tried my whole life, but who knows if there's anything waiting for me up there. But when he got up there, says the Medrash, that there was such blissful dynamics for him in the luxuries and in the positivities and everything waiting for him, because he pushed forward with every word of Torah to his fullest extent at that day, and for every Maisa that he did. Now, some things he felt it was only 80%. It never made it to 100. But in Shemayim, there was tremendous reward waiting for him because of all that effort and everything being done. Vatischak liyom acharon. And that's why at the end of the Sedra, everything was put together and ready to go. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu to go put up the Mishkan. And he went and he tried, he could not do it. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to him, and this Rashi brings, and this is in the Medrash, Hashem said to Moshe Rabbeinu, you go up to the boards and the walls and everything, and act as if you're going into the motion. Pretend. Because at the end, you're not going to be able to put it up, and I will have to help you and do it for you. So if that's the case, why didn't Hashem just do it and put it up? But the answer is a very important one, and to the story of Rebbe Avuah, because the power of getting the credit and etching into the essence of your neshama for all the efforts that took place when you thought you didn't do it. you're getting the reward, because that's what I love. When Yidden put their sweat and toil ahead and want to achieve at a certain spot, that is the nachas ruach for me. And that's why Rabbi Avua was zoichet to what he was zoichet to, because Moshe Rabbeinu etched into the essence of Klal Yisrael that you can try, you can toil, you can sweat, you can work your head off, and at the end it doesn't happen, but you get shining reward for it. And when Moshe Rabbeinu said, Yehi Rotzon, Shetishra Shechina b'maseh yedeichem, that the Shechina should rest, he gave him a bracha, that in the work of your toil, the results will be, the Shechina will be there. Now, what kind of a statement is that? They were already promised the Shechina. In the beginning, when they were told to build the Mishkan, V'yasu li migdash v'shachanti b'socham. They were promised that after they build it, there's going to be Shechina in the Mishkan, in the Bais HaMikdash. And even though we know that the Shechina is everywhere, so what do you need the Mishkan for? But the intensification of coming down with the tzimtzum, that it was so powerfully together that it had to be diluted to be able to come trickle full force into the hearts of Klal Yisrael and to Yidden. So that was the V'yasu li migdash v'shachanti b'socham. But now is a vehicle to bring it into actuality. That was the bracha. Not that the Shechina should be there, that was said in the beginning. But there should be b'maseh yedeichem, that you should see, and many Mefarshim teach that it's not just going on the Mishkan, it was a bracha liolam va'ed, that Yidden should see the toil and the work of their hands come into reality. And it was from that bracha that it came out. And if you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says that he first said, V'hi noyam Hashem Elokeinu oleinu maseh yodenu konana oleinu maseh yodenu konanehu, that pasuk many tzaddikim say before they do any mitzvah, before they eat the matzah, before they eat the menorah, the moror, that we say that pasuk to push aside and to divest, dilute, and destroy the samach mem who wants to stop us from doing the mitzvah. And the pasuk, by saying it, is the prelude of opening up the powerful anti-samach mem, anti-Yetzer Hara effort. Now, I said this vort around 25 years ago in a public place, and somebody got up and said that by Pesach you mentioned that we break the matzah into 5. In other words, we break it into 2, but tzaddikim, al pi Kabbalah, broke it into 5. And it corresponds with this pasuk, which when we take, let's say, and say yachatz, and we say, V'hi noyam Hashem Elokeinu, and then we break the matzah, it is the power of the pasuk that opens the door and paves the way for us to break the Yetzer Hara. And why, according to regular, we're breaking the good from the bad, and we're putting one away for the afikomen. But according to Kabbalah, that we break it into 5 because this pasuk has 5 news at the end of 5 different words. And that breaks the pei reish dinim, the new is Gematria 56. 5 times 56 is 280. And we know that the Peiresh Dinim are the forces that work against us. So somebody stood up at that gathering and said, Rabbi Balkany, if the Pasuk, V'hi Noyam, is so powerful, as you're quoting the Arizal, the B'nai Yisachar, so why don't we just say the Pasuk? Who has to break the matzah then? So the answer is because this is Olam Hazeh. And we have 3 things: machshava, thought; dibur, speech; and maisa. This is the olam, the world of masa. That means we have to have good machshava, and we have to have the dibur. So we say the pasuk v'hi noyam, but it's not the maisa. And the vehicle of effectuating it and bringing it into total reality is the maisa, the action. And that's why we have to break the matzah. And we can't just say the pasuk. We have to break the matzah. Now, you'll wonder, why does it say b'ma'aseh yedechem? Why doesn't it just say Yehi Ratzon Shetishrei Shechina b'ma'aseichem? Why does it add the word yedechem, hands? And if you remember in Parshas Yisro, I told you that the Zohar HaKadosh refers to the Parsha of Yisro giving advice to his son-in-law Moshe Rabbeinu that you're going to drop from the overload, and you have to learn how to appoint and delegate and relegate different levels with different leaders who can do the small jobs, and the big things you'll bring to you. That was his advice. And the Sfarim, the Zohar HaKadosh, refers to it as the Maisa, the Inyan, the whole story, as Va'ata Techeza. And I told to you then that there are 5 psukim before the words Va'ata Techeza. So why does everyone refer to it Va'ata Techeza? Because it was the positive. In other words, the criticisms was no problem, because it was meant well, but it was still criticism. People can criticize, but they have to make sure they have the follow-up of some practical, reasonable solution. And the solution and practical advice of implementation came by the words Va'ata Techazeh. But the Zohar HaKadosh says on that Va'ata Techazeh that on our hands we have a lot of lines. No, you don't have it on your forehead, you don't have it on your feet, but on the palm of our hand we have all sorts of lines. And people who know Chochmas Yad can take a look and say, ooh, you have this quality, that quality, you did this Averi, that, all from looking at the hands. And that's why the Gemara many times will have a vikuach, to Amoraim, to Tanoim, discussing an Inyan, and they go back and forth, and at the end, the Gemara says, Lo have biyodei. He didn't have it in his hand. So why does the Gemara say that? It should say, Lo have b'daito, b'chochmaso. I mean, it was the discussion and the take and give was a reflection of their opinions and their mind-setting ideas and answers or solutions to the discussion at hand. But the teretz is that if in his shoirish it didn't show up and they with their Ruach HaKodesh was able to see at the end of the story it wasn't there in their hand, Lo hava biyodei, they just said, go outside, puk chazi eich amad debar, go outside and see how Klal Yisrael is noyeg, see how they are doing this inyan, and that's how we should all paskin. because that will be the eye-opener in the shaila here of what to do or what not to do, by just watching how did Klal Yisrael for the hundreds and hundreds of years of their existence deal with this issue. And that's how you'll establish it. But the lohava biyadei, that the shoyrish comes back to the hand, that's Yehi Ratzon Shetishra Shechina B'Maaseh Yedechem. We should be able to see it in your shoyrish neshama, that it's part and parcel of you and everything around you. Now, I mentioned in the beginning that this Sunday is Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And as I said, it's always one day, and 2 weeks later always is the first night of Pesach. This year, the first night of Pesach begins Motzoi Shabbos, which means Erev Pesach is Shabbos. And from Shabbos, we go straight into the realm of Pesach. Now, we know that Pesach is the source of all the Yomim Tovim. And so much so, because if you take a look at Shavuos, that we got the Torah, but if they didn't leave Mitzrayim, there would have been no Kabbalas HaTorah. Or Sukkos, that we were in the huts with the Shechina above us, on the Schach, there would have been no Sukkos, whether you say Anani HaKavod, or you say, whatever you want to say, the Schach or the Sukkah was, but there would have been nothing if we wouldn't have left Mitzrayim. So it's the source, and so much so that the Mishnah says that if someone makes a neder, and he promises to the Bais Hamikdash, and he wants to do something good, and he promises something that he enumerates. So at what point is he over on his neder if he doesn't do it? So there's a difference of opinion. One says you have to pass 3 regolim. And regel means Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot. It does not mean Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. But what's the difference of opinion? One holds, as long if he made the neder Erev Sukkos, so he has to pass Sukkos, Pesach, and Shavuos, and that's 3 regolim, and he is over on his neder if he did not bring it. The other opinion is he has to pass 3, but it has to be beginning with Pesach, because that's the shoyrish of all of the Yomim Tovim. And as the Ramban says, that's why we mention every Friday night, Zecher L'Yetzias Mitzrayim, Zecher. I mean, Matan Torah, if we left Mitzrayim and we didn't have Kabbalas HaTorah, so what would be so special about Yetzias Mitzrayim? That we went out from Mitzrayim to do what? To drink tea and to relax on a hammock and drink lemonade? The Tachlis and Tafka was the Torah, yet we don't mention Shabbos or anything. We never talk about it. We don't say it in Mitzrayim. In Shema, Kriya Shema, we say it morning and night too. Mitzvahs Hasei D'Oraisa, of saying Krishma Bismana, and we mention Mitzrayim, Yetzias Mitzrayim, but we don't mention Matan Torah. So the answer, says the Rambam, because the backbone and the cementing factor of Yetzias Mitzrayim was able to instill, impart, and be through and through at every level with emunah. And the power of the emunah that we have is from Yetzias Mitzrayim. Vayar Yisrael es hayod hagedola asher asa Hashem b'Mitzrayim, vayiru ha'am es Hashem vayaminu b'Hashem u'v'Moshe avdo. And by the way, that's the Vayar Yisrael es hayod hagedola, because there's a heichel called Yad. And the Shivtei were so big that they were at that level, because the pasuk says, Vayishma Ruvain. Ruvain heard, Vayatzi Leo miyodam, and he saved him from their hand. Now, if you ask most people, what does that pasuk say and mean? They would say, Ruvain heard, and he saved him, Yosef, miyodam, from their hands. But it's not plural. It doesn't say miyadehem. It says miyodam, from their hand. What does that mean? It means that the Shivtei Ko were at the level of Vayar Yisrael's Hayod Hagadola. And that's why no one could do anything to them. And the Zohar Kodesh asks, if they sold Yosef for money, they were Chayav Misa. Why weren't they killed? So the Zohar says, because there was no Malach Soraf, Oifan or Chayas HaKodesh. They were at the level that they could effectuate a oinesh of death to the Shivtei Ko. And as I've said many times to you, that's why they were all nisgalgal till 1600 years later, and they were killed as the Asura Haruge Malchus. But Reb Elazar Reb Hyrcanus, who was the neshama of Ruvain, who wasn't there by the Mechira. He was back home by Yaakov Avinu, Kibarav, his day to take care of the father, whatever, his Sako V'Taniza, whatever you want to say, he was away, but he wasn't there. And that's why Reb Elazar Reb Hyrcanus, he walked the streets, the Romans didn't grab him. Reb Shimon Bar Yochai had to run into a Ma'ora for 12 years and then go back for another year. All of them, that's how they were killed. But that's how they were killed at that time, as a kapara for that Mechiras Yosef. But Vayatzileo miyodam, the hand that we were just talking about, that lohava biyodei, that's a big, big madrega. So, shetishra shchina b'maseh yedechem, that you should all, in your individual inscription and shaykhs to that world of Yad, that you should be able to see it flourish and bring out great things. And what I wanted to tell you was that Rosh Chodesh Nisan, if you look in Musaf of every Rosh Chodesh, when you daven Musaf, you will see from the Arizal a tziruf of the 4 letters of Hashem's name, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Now, it's every month in a different order, and it tells you, if you know how to read it, how much good will be in the month. The more it's Kesidron straight is Chesed. The more that Nebuch was negative, you take a look, let's say, at Ov. It's Havaya, Hey, Vav, Yud Kei. Because up till Chamisha Asr Ba'ov, it's still part of the perennius of Tammuz and half of Av, as the Arizal says. And that's why the Hey at the end is before the Vav. It's Hey Vav. But then the second half is Yud Hey, because that already goes into Chesed V'Rachamim. Now, the only month that has pure Chesed and Rachamim is Chodesh Nisan, and that's why the tziruf is straight. Yud Kei Vav Kei. Yismechu hashamayim v'sogel ha'aretz, and a person when he davens Musaf, and he says, Baruch atah Hashem, and he says Hashem's name, he's supposed to be mechaven. What is the tziruf for that month? And in Chodesh Nisan, it is so big and so above that it is unbelievable, its power to be able to pick up the whole Klal Yisrael. And that's why the Arizal says that Chodesh Nisan is so much bigger than Chodesh Tishrei. Because there's such a thing as Isarusa de la Ela and Isarusa de la Tata, which means when we are showered with good, is it a result of something we're doing down here in this world? And that evokes, that brings out from heaven a good response? Or is it something that up there in heaven, that they're showering us with goodness, even though we didn't do anything down here? And the Arizal says that Chodesh Nisan is able to bring down a ton of goodness without any maisa from us. But Tishrei, if that's Isarusa de la Tata, you have to first do something. If you want to get the hashpah and the birkas moyadecha from the Yom Tiv, you have to take that shofar on Rosh Hashanah and sound it. You have to fast Yom Kippur. You have to take a lulav and esrog and a sukkah on Sukkos, or you don't get, you get, but not the full birkas moyadecha. Now, Pesach we also do, but says the Bnei Yisachar in describing and explaining the Arizal that a person is showered down regardless of what he does do or doesn't do. And with that he answers a question. Why does it say Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh HaShabbos? By every other siyum, by every other bracha, Yom Tiv, Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael V'Hazmanim. Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael V'Yom HaKippurim. Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael V'Roshei Chodoshim. Every single bracha has the word Yisrael. Because on every Yom Tiv, if down here in Olam Hazeh, they were not Mekadesh, the Chodesh, the Bezin didn't proclaim that it was Rosh Chodesh, it wasn't Rosh Chodesh. And you didn't start counting the days to make Yom Kippur 10 days later, you had to wait till the next day. And from then, 10 days later was Yom Kippur. So it was dependent on Klal Yisrael. So every Zmanim and Yom Kippur and Rosh Chodesh depends on Klal Yisrael, what they do or they don't do. And that's why we say Yisrael in each and every bracha. But when you come to Shabbos, we don't mention Yisrael, because do we need Rosh Chodesh to keep Shabbos? We have Shabbos every 7 days, regardless of when Rosh Chodesh comes out or doesn't come out. It makes no difference. It's not the Kviyas HaChodesh, the establishment of the first day of the month, that makes it the month on Shabbos. Shabbos has nothing to do with Rosh Chodesh. Shabbos is every 7th day. So we say just Mekadesh HaShabbos. Says the Arizal, that's the Bechina of Pesach. that Pesach showers down, and his Lashon, which the Bnei Yissaschar repeats, is Shelo al Yedei Ma'aseinu. Not because of something that we ate the matzah, we would be showered down without the matzah. A person eats matzah and has the kavanas of the L'Shem Shamayim, and that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this should produce for you the greatest nachas ruach, as Klal Yisrael is eating the mitzvahs aseh d'oraisa v'achilas matzah b'leil Pesach. The person, of course, soars heavenward and shines with the full luster of all the extra touches. But the basics you would get even without it. Because it's a month of Isarusa de La'ela, coming down from heaven, that special hashpah. And that is the reason that the Dorshei Rishumos said that the first day of Pesach, the day of the week of Pesach, that the first day is, there's an aleph base called At Bash. We match up the first and the last letter, an aleph with a tov. A beis, the second letter, with the second to the last letter, a shin. The third letter, a reish, a gimel. Whatever the third day of Pesach is, and this year it will be Monday night, Tuesday, is keneged the reish. And it goes through the days of Pesach, of what it corresponds to. And it's not just a nice drasha that, like this year, the first day of Pesach is Motzoi Shabbos Sunday. That corresponds to the Tov is Tisha B'Av. So without looking at a calendar, you know that the day of Tisha B'Av will come out on Sunday, the same way as the first day of Pesach. The second day of Pesach is Sunday night, and that's the Beis, Keneged the Shin is Shavuos. So without looking at a calendar, you know that the first day of Shavuos will come out Sunday night, Monday. That's the first day of Shavuos in this upcoming year after Pesach. And the third is a Gimel, which means the third day of Pesach, which is Monday night, Tuesday, is Keneged the Reish, which is the third to the last letter, is Rosh Hashanah. The Rosh Hashanah will be Monday night, Tuesday, the first day, and the second day will be the day after. Now the Daled corresponds, the fourth day of Pesach, to the Daled is Keneged the Kuf, which is Kriyas HaTorah. Simchas Torah this year will fall out on Tuesday night, Wednesday. And the Hey, which is the fifth letter of the Aleph Beis, is the fifth letter from the end, which is Tzaddik, which is Yom Kippur, which is Tzom, will fall out the fifth day of the week of Pesach, the same day. So it's a nice drasha, and we can go to Vav, which is the previous Purim, and there's more to talk about that, and the Zion, which is Chamisha Asar B'Av. But the point I want to bring out is that Kadmonim showed through the Kriyas HaTorah of Pesach every day how it corresponds to that Yom Tov or to that Tisha B'Av. The Kriyas HaTorah of the first day of Pesach, there were ramazim to the Tisha B'Av, to the Churban. So we see that it's not just a nice thing, it's the essence of the Yom Tov is in Pesach. And that's why the opinion of the one that says to be over a neder, you have to go through 3 regalim, but it's got to be starting with Pesach. So if you Erev Sukkot made a neder and you didn't do it, you have to pass not just the Sukkot and Shavuos and then Pesach. It's got to be Sukkot, Shavuos, and then the 3, beginning with Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. So you have to go over 5 different regalim to be over the neder at that time, because Pesach is the shoirish of the regalim. And therefore we have to realize that when we come into the month of Nisan, that and Parshas HaChodesh that we're going to read from the 2nd Sefer Torah this Shabbos, the Vilna Gaon said, HaChodesh hazeh lochem Rosh Chodoshim, that the whole month of Nisan, every day of the month has a halacha of Rosh Chodesh. What does that mean? That just like on Rosh Chodesh, a regular Rosh Chodesh of the whole year, Kislev, Teves, Shvat, you're not allowed to fast. So HaChodesh hazeh lochem, that every day of the month of Nisan has a halacha of Rosh Chodoshim. You're not allowed to fast. We don't say a hesped. We don't say tachnun. It has a halacha of Rosh Chodesh. But Rishon hu lachem, the first day of Nisan, l'chol chodshei hashana. It has the halacha of not the Rosh Chodesh, but the days of the month, which you are allowed to fast. And as a matter of fact, there are many people, it's called Tainis Tzadikim, who fast Rosh Chodesh Nisan. But they're not allowed to fast the whole month. And that's how the Vilna Gaon teach that pasuk. Unbelievable. HaChodesh hazeh lochem, the whole month of Nisan has Rosh Chodoshim, has the halacha of Rosh Chodesh, that you can't do any of these things, like a din Rosh Chodesh. But Rishon hu lachem, but the first day of Nisan, meaning Rosh Chodesh Nisan, hu l'chol chodshei hashana, you are allowed to fast, and it's called Tainis Tzadikim. It has in it the tremendous power. We're going into a month, and that's why it says that in Chodesh Nisan, Nigalu Avosenu, that the Geula took place by Mitzrayim in Nisan, Pesach, and Asidin Li Goyal, and they're going to be redeemed then also. Now, we say that every day you're supposed to waiting for the Geula, Mashiach is coming, and so what do you mean? It's not Nisan. That means in the middle of Kislev, we're supposed to believe that Mashiach comes. But the Gemara says, Asidin Li Goyal, it's talking about Nisan. But the teretz is, many Mefarshim say, it is the most opportune time. That means it could happen before without so many of the restrictions and so many of the issues of why we're waiting and why he's not coming yet. And of course, we wait and he could come anytime, the entire year. But in Nisan, it is at the front doorstep, begging to come, that the Geula Shlema should happen. And that is the reason why we have the Seder, which we're going to talk, it's 3 weeks till Pesach, so I will have what to talk about, the Bezos Hashem. But the idea that we are able to encompass ourselves under the umbrella of such heights. Imagine if you went on an elevator and they brought you to the 120th level of a building and you're at the top, the pinnacle, the turret, and you're looking out the window at everything down and everything under and everything happening. that's what happens Pesach. We are elevated. And Shalo al Yedei Maseinu, we're zochel to the tremendous hashpah that comes from it. And if you'll ask me, how could it be that the first day of Pesach is coupled together with Tisha B'Av? I mean, they're diametrically opposed. The first day of Pesach represents Spitz, the pinnacle of Geula, and and Tisha B'Av is the Spitz of Golus, mourning, Avelus, the opposite. How could they be matched? So the Svarim say that a Yid in his Seder does it with perfection of Kavana. The Dibur is a Dioraisa, Hagod, it's the only two Dioraisas at the Seder. Morah Bizman Hazeh and Arba Kosos Bizman Hazeh is Durabonon. But Matzah and Haggadah are Dioraisa. And that can bring about that there is no Tisha B'Av that coming year. That means it's linked to Tisha B'Av, yeah. And we asked, how could those two opposites be linked together? The answer is because the first one could eradicate the second. That through our kavanas and through our activities and through everything that we do, the night of Pesach is so heavenly and so elevated and so auspicious that it can not only transform, but transpose and turn about everything about Golus and about Mashiach and about not having a Tisha B'Av that summer. So we're going to talk, Be'ezus Hashem, a lot more about Chodesh Nisan and about the Karbanos and why the Mishkan began its activity, Rosh Chodesh Nisan, even though it was finished Chanukah, and the Medrash says the people were making fun of Moshe Rabbeinu. And they said, oh, you rushed us a day after Yom Kippur, bring the gold, bring the silver. We finished it by Chanukah. Now you're telling us to wait? So we're going to talk next week. We'll open with that vort of what the Medrash says, why, and everything that happened at that time. But in the meantime, chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek.